This is the Extreme Stewardship Podcast, where we explore anything and everything that gets us better at making things good and good at making things better. Right now, I'm trying to get better at understanding and participating in the conversation that a lot of people are having about the theology of work. Each of the past several episodes has been dedicated to reading and reflecting on one book on the theology of work. So I've read through Tim Keller's book, Every Good Endeavor, John Mark Comer's book, Garden City, David Bahnsen's book, Full Time, Jordan Rayner's book, The Sacredness of Secular Work, and a whole bunch more. There are more books on the theology of work out there, and I'll come back to those in a little while. But for the next couple of episodes, I want to stay in the lane of understanding current conversations about the theology of work. But rather than deal with many topics in one book, I want to deal with one topic across many books. And the topic of these next few episodes is money. The Bible has loads to say about money, thousands of verses about money, in fact. I'm obviously not going to deal with everything the Bible has to say about money, but what I am going to do is ask the question, what might we say about a biblical view of money insofar as our theology of money is part of our theology of work? So I come to the topic of money through the lens of my theology of work, and this is what I find. This first episode on that topic simply answers the question, why? Why should we think about a theology of money as a component of a theology of work? And there are two reasons. The first reason comes from something that John Knapp says in his book, How the Church Fails Business People. He says this: the church has never quite found a consensus on how to reconcile the biblical injunctions to give thanks to God for wealth and also to renounce any desire for it. This ambivalence widens the chasm between the worlds of faith and work, for the subject of work cannot be fully addressed apart from the making and spending of money. And so I'm asking the question, why is it the case that the subject of work cannot be fully addressed apart from the making and spending of money? Why, in other words, have I not brought my theology of work full circle unless I have included in that theology of work some specific things about a theology of money? Now, I want to pause for a moment here and make sure that I am clear in saying that a theology of work cannot be reduced to a theology of money. Work is improving creation. Work is not simply making money. There is a great deal of good work that happens in the world constantly that does not involve getting paid for it, does not involve any direct financial exchange. So a theology of work includes much more than a theology of money, but it does include a theology of money, and here's why. Work is improving creation. Work is taking all the things that God has made and put into our care and facilitating their movement in the direction that God would have them go. Money is one of those things. It is a creaturely thing that God has given us to be used for his purposes. Part of our calling as stewards, as workers, is to improve things in relation to money. And so when we look at a creaturely thing and say, oh, that is a good thing that God has made, and there are opportunities to do good work with that creaturely thing, I can say the same thing about money. Money is a creaturely gift from God that can be used for his purposes. And of course, what is true on the positive of all things and money is also true in the negative of all things and money. Every single creaturely gift that God gives can be turned by us into an idol. There is not one thing God has made that we have not worshipped. There is not one creature that we have not tried to turn into the Creator. First and foremost, ourselves. Of course, we turn ourselves into God rather than seeing God himself as the God and Lord and owner of all things. And money holds perhaps a special place in this conversation, not separately from all the other creaturely things that we can worship when we shouldn't, but as a special kind of creaturely thing that we can worship when we shouldn't, because it is the means by which often we obtain all the other things. And so if my idol is prestige, money is a way to get there. If my idol is security, money is a way to get there. If my idol is possessions, money is a way to get there. If my idol is accomplishments, money is a way to get there. If my idol is networking, money is a way to get there. So all of the various idols, or perhaps many of the various idols we have, are more reachable through money. And so when Paul says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, it's not that money itself is bad. Money is a good creaturely gift from God, but money has this special way of inviting us into our worship of all the wrong things. So we need to name money as a good creaturely gift from God that is interwoven with much of our work. And we need to name it as a potential idol, like so many of the other spheres of our work. So that's the first reason we need to talk about money in relation to a theology of work. The second reason comes from a slightly different angle. As I've been reading through these books on the theology of work over the past few months, many of them eventually at some point in the book will get to conversations about money, sometimes a little bit more focused on finance, personal finance, spending, generosity, that kind of thing, and other times more focused on broader economic systems and economic theories. But as I was reading some of these books, I found myself stopping and thinking, wait, I really liked what you just said about the theology of work. And I'm not even remotely on board with what you just said about money. And there were some particular books I just found myself writing the word naive in the margin over and over and over. And they would have these really good foundations. And it was like someone had laid the foundation for a house and really done a fabulous job of it. And then they brought in a top tier framing crew and started to frame the house out. And then they'd gotten to the electrical and hired a bunch of 12-year-olds, because my sense of their ability to speak coherently and biblically and wisely into the theology of work foundation was really strong. And then they'd get to money, and it was like they just didn't have any idea what they were doing, what they were talking about. And again, sometimes those moments had to do with personal finance. Other times they had more to do with the broader economic structures. And I will say at the outset here, I am no economist. I am not an expert on those things. I'm in the middle right now of trying to become more educated. But what I'm going to say here and in the following episodes is much more focused on the finance, the personal finance side of things. I do not have sufficiently educated opinions on broader economic theories to speak out loud about that just yet, though I would like to get there. But underneath what I felt was naive and misguided and not at all the way I thought the theology of work was taking us, whether it have to do with the personal side or the economic system side, here's what I think was underneath all of that. There's a lot in these books and in other books, other conversations as well. It's a popular set of terms today, is the difference between what people will call a scarcity mindset and an abundance mindset. And so there are many good and right calls to Christians, particularly to live in the world not having a scarcity mindset, but having an abundance mindset. A scarcity mindset leads to greed and grasping and theft and selfishness, and nobody's looking out for me, so I got to look out for me, so I got to get mine, and there's not enough to go around, so I better just take care of me. And it's very self-oriented, it's very self-centered, and ultimately it comes from and produces more fear. When I live in a scarcity mindset, nothing will ever be enough. I will always be afraid that I don't have enough, and therefore I will always be afraid that I need to get more and more and more. And that's a scarcity mindset when it comes to time, when it comes to money, when it comes to all sorts of good creaturely gifts that God has given us. And there is much encouragement today in the theology of work literature and elsewhere to step out of a scarcity mindset and step into an abundance mindset. And an abundance mindset says God is the owner of all things. If he wants to supply us with resources, he is very capable of doing that. There is no need to live in anxiety and fear and worry. As Jesus said, don't worry about what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat. Your heavenly Father knows these things and is so fully capable of supplying those legitimate needs. So instead of living out of, I've got to get mine, because if I don't, nobody's ever going to give it to me and there won't be enough for me. Rather, I live out of a sense that God can supply my needs. And therefore, instead of living into fear, I'm going to live into generosity. And that's good, and that's right, and that's biblical. But here's where I think things have gone sideways in some of the theology of work literature. They will talk about scarcity versus abundance, but they will in fact introduce a third category that won't be named. It'll be named as abundance, but it's not. It's different. They will use a third category that I'm going to call limitlessness. So a scarcity mindset says there's not enough, I got to get it for me. An abundance mindset says there is enough, I will be there, I will be okay, and therefore I can share, I can be generous, I can think of others. But a limitlessness mindset says there can be no lack. This is an infinite resource. We could never run out. There is no limit. There's plenty, the end. This does not prompt generosity. An abundance mindset prompts generosity because it says, I can have enough through the work that I do that God has given me, and therefore I can share. A limitless mindset says, why would I care? It doesn't prompt fear. It doesn't prompt generosity. It prompts carelessness. It prompts laziness. And so some of these books on the theology of work were saying, hey, because there's enough to go around, just throw it every which way. And there was, I think, a real failure of stewardship. An abundance mindset says there will be enough, but enough doesn't mean it isn't still a finite resource. You and I are finite creatures. Everything God gives to us other than himself is a finite resource. And because it is a finite resource, it has a certain kind of value. If a resource is limitless, it also is worthless. It has no value because there's no need to care for it. There's no need to think highly of it. There's no need to steward it. And so it leads again to waste and laziness. And I want to be careful how I say this because I'm still thinking through exactly how this works and exactly the implications of this point. But here's what I'm noticing. I'm noticing that those in our world who do work that has a direct financial exchange. I build a product. I sell you the product. You give me money in exchange for the product. You value the product and the money. I value the product and the money because the two are linked. Those of us who live in the academic space, perhaps somewhat more broadly in the so-called nonprofit space, I think we have a harder time with this. Because there is less often in those spaces a direct correlation between the value that I give and the value that I receive. And academics are notorious for wanting the money to just sort of appear so that they can do their work. And the work of an academic can be very, very good work. That's my work. I believe in the work of intellectual growth, of exploration, whether that be in the science or the humanities, in theology, in any other field. I'm a big fan because that work can improve creation. But those of us that do that work are sometimes horrifically naive about the fact that it takes money coming from somewhere for that work to be made possible, because I don't build a thing and sell a thing unless I'm writing a book or something like that. But that's not the normal flow of my work. The normal flow of my work is being in an office and writing and teaching and interacting with students. And in my nonprofit space, we're a little bit in the middle because there is a product of education that we sell. But again, the further apart we draw the money from the thing that is exchanged for the money, the less we are going to understand how money really works and where money really comes from. And that, to me, is perhaps the bottom line here, that the naivete that I'm seeing in finance conversations or economic conversations in theology of work literature stems from the fact that some of us just don't know where money comes from. You may have had the experience of explaining to your kids why we're not going to buy that thing. And however the conversation plays out with a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old or whatever it may be, underneath the why we're not going to buy that thing is that I, as a father, have an understanding of where money comes from and where it goes and how the whole system of value exchange works that my child doesn't have. And so all that to say, much of the theology of work literature that I've been reading doesn't seem to know where money comes from. or how money works. And so when they go from a theology of work to a theology of money, a whole lot of naivete and foolishness results because of that problem. So the next few episodes are hopefully going to take a better account of how money works and where money comes from, so that we can incorporate a solid biblical, practical theology of money into our theology of work. So that, I think, is all I have to say about that for now. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Extreme Stewardship Podcast. My name is Michael Kibbe, and I teach Bible and theology at Great Northern University in Spokane, Washington. My behind-the-scenes partner in this endeavor is Ben Kibbe, CEO of Kibbe Consulting in Columbiana, Ohio. Our editor-in-chief is Liam Olmsted. Art comes from Leah Leanhoutz, and music is provided by Dave Murray of Derridoon Guitars. If this podcast has been useful or challenging to you, shoot us an email, extremestewards@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you think it might be useful or challenging to anyone else, you know what to do. Ultimately, we hope that listening to this podcast has helped you get better at making things good and good at making things better.